QuickBooks Pro Desktop 2021 Company Preferences, focusing in detail on the accounting company preferences. Let's get into it with Intuit's QuickBooks Pro Desktop 2021. Here we are on our desktop. Remember that you can open QuickBooks a few different ways. One is by opening QuickBooks itself and going directly to, it should take you directly to the file that you had open last time, or you can go to the data file itself, which we have put in this folder. I'm going to go to the QuickBooks data file, and you can double click on the QuickBooks data file, making sure it's the QBW file, opening up that file. Now we're going to take a look at the preferences. Normally when we open up QuickBooks, we will see this home page. I'll typically maximize the screen over here to do this, and I like to see the open window. So every time I'm going to basically go to the View tab, and I'm going to be going down to the Open Windows list, and that'll change the left-hand side so that we can see the Open Windows list, which is the Home tab and the chart of accounts here. I'm going to close up the chart of accounts. So just the home tab, and you can have multiple windows open on this left-hand side. Nice list to have. You can minimize this list as we go, which is probably what we should do here, considering the fact we don't need it for what we're doing now. Now we just set up the QuickBooks system. Now we want to go into the preferences. Now the default preferences are usually pretty good. So you could basically open up without spending a lot of time in the preferences and move forward and be okay. But there are a couple things that we want to make sure and check in on. And if you want to make adjustments, you want to know where to go with the company preferences. Therefore, we will go through them in some detail, although we're going to keep a lot of the default settings for them. To do that, we're going to go into the Edit dropdown. We're going to take a look at the preferences. So Edit dropdown and then the preferences. And on the left-hand side, we've got the types of preferences on the left-hand side. So these are going to be the categories of the preferences. And we're just going to go through them pretty much from top to bottom, starting out with the accounting preferences and then taking a look at most of them. Again, most of them will keep at the defaults, but you want to know where these items are at. Now we're in the accounting preferences. We got the My Preferences, and then we have the company preferences. Nothing's in the My Preferences tab, so let's move on over to the company preferences. The first item is to use account numbers, and this is one of the big items you want to be aware of. Account numbers are going to give you a lot more control over the ordering of your accounts if you know how to use them. However, if you do not know how to use them, they can cause you a lot of problems. Your account numbers can make no sense and really cause you a lot of problems. So Intuit basically does not require the account numbers and has the default as them being off. We're going to keep with that convention here. We might talk more about account numbers as we go. We will talk more about them as we create the accounts and look at the ordering of the accounts, so you get a better idea of when you can put the account numbers in, and then we can think about how to use the account numbers properly. We're going to keep the default as off for now, but if you were to click on that, then you have the lowest, show lowest subcategory only that you can turn on or off. Then we have the required accounts. We're going to keep that as the default on. We have the class. We can use class tracking for transactions. We might test out the class tracking in future presentations. This is a very useful feature that can give you a lot more control in certain areas when you want to be breaking out your data, for example, your income statement accounts, into classes such as classes by region. If you have different offices, you might use the class tracking to break out your accounts by region. So there's different kind of reasons why class tracking can be useful, and it's kind of a more advanced skill, or a skill that's going to be specialized to particular industries, worth learning. If you're in those industries, it's worth learning in general so you have an idea of it, but we're not going to be concentrating on the class tracking at this time. We might do a little bit more of it in the future. The default is for the class tracking to be off. And then we have the automatically assigned general journal entry number. So the general journal entry is going to be one of the kind of forms that we will use, or in other words, when we don't have a standardized journal entry form for QuickBooks, then we will use a journal entry. And otherwise, if we don't have like an invoice or a sales receipt for a particular type of transaction, then we'll have a journal entry. And when we make the journal entries, QuickBooks will automatically assign a number to it. That's typically a good practice to have, so we're going to keep that as the default. Then it says warn when posting a transaction to a retained earnings. Now, retained earnings is going to be a type of account, like an equity type of account. Now, retained earnings is the account we think of as the income statement closing out to retained earnings. So it is unusual for us to then be posting to retained earnings oftentimes. However, there will be times when we would need to do so. This will then say every time you post to a retained earnings account, it's going to give you a warning and say, hey, you really want to do that because you're posting to retained earnings, which is not something you do all the time. We will be posting to retained earnings every once in a while, but we want to keep that warning on, or I will keep it on as basically the default warning. Then we have this warn if transactions are 90 days in the past. So you can change this to any kind of range that you want. If you are working in real time, this is a great tool because it's quite common for a problem to be a date problem. So when there's a data entry error, it's often going to be a date error. And if you're working all in real time, then it's great to have these things as tight as possible in terms of your warnings, so that it'll tell you, hey, you entered something like last year. You've entered the wrong date by far into it, and it'll give you a warning on it. When we are doing a practice problem, however, that we can't really do that because we're going to be working as if in a practice problem, and we're going to have to use a date range that's going to be outside what might be the normal date range. So if we do not turn these off, then we're going to get a warning every time we enter a transaction. So for our purposes, we want to turn off the warning if the transaction are over the 90 days, and if they're in the future type of transactions, we will be removing those two for the practice problem. In real life, if you're doing the data entry in real time, you want these things to be as tight as possible. However, oftentimes people will kind of lag on their data input. So if, for example, you're putting your input into the system based on your banking information or something like that, and you do it monthly, or you haven't done it for a few months and you're trying to put a whole bunch of information in, then this warning is going to be annoying because you're always going to be putting data in to a prior period. So you might want to go in here and maybe not turn it off, but make the past transactions far enough back that it's going to be picking up your transactions, and then you're only going to see this warning sign when you miskey like really bad. Like, if you're entering data for like 5 months ago into this, then you're going to want to put this up to 5 months time period. And then if you enter something like last year or enter the wrong year in it or something like that, it should give you that warning. And that is really useful to do because, again, most of the problems with the data input are due to actual date problems, entering the wrong date as you do the data input. So those are going to be the major components of the Preferences tab. If you make any changes and you go to the next tab, say I want to go to the Bills tab, it's going to then give you this little error message, or this little warning message said, you made changes to the account preferences. Do you wish to save them? We're going to say, yes, please save them. And then if I double check and I go up to the Accounting tab, now these two have been saved. They have been unchecked.